Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Steve Galilee. I'm the CEO of the New South Wales Minerals Council and your MC for today's lunch. And welcome to our final Sydney Mining Club event for 2025. And what a year it's been. And where has it gone? Where has it gone? We kicked off in February this year with our first event focused on the spiritual home of mining in Australia with Broken Hill Mines, RASP and Pinnacle projects. And since then, we've toured the nation and we've toured the globe, hearing from companies involved in projects across New South Wales, Queensland, West Australia and Tasmania, and also in Mongolia, Serbia, the United States and Chile, to name a few. We've covered a wide range of commodities, including antimony, gold, iron ore, silver, zinc, uranium, critical minerals and rare earths, and of course, old king coal. But today we return to New South Wales with the Syerston Scandium project in the central west of the state, one of the most compelling and advanced critical mineral developments in the country. With one of the world's largest and highest grade scandium resources, the Syerston Scandium project is positioned to supply a reliable, scalable, Western source of this critical metal. And soon we will be hearing about this project from Sam Riggall, who will also be talking about critical minerals more generally, the Managing Director of Sunrise Energy Metals. But before we do that, there are a few formalities. The first formality is to plug another event, the SMEDGE event, the SMEDGE Cruise, the SMEDGE Christmas Cruise. We've plugged SMEDGE events up here before, and I hope it's boosted the numbers. The SMEDGE Christmas Cruise will be held this time next week, on Thursday, the 11th of December. I'm told that there'll be enough cordial for everybody. And if you need more information about that event, or if you would like to book tickets, they are available from the SMEDGE website. I'm also told it's going to be a great event for the young and the not so young, and also the very old. So get your sea legs ready and sign up for the SMEDGE Cruise if you're looking for something to do next Thursday. SMEDGE are a great organisation. We've supported their events here before, and we wish SMEDGE all the best for your Christmas cruise next week. I'd like to acknowledge our chair, Julian Malnick, who's here with us today. It's great to have Julian here today, as always. And Julian, you want to come up here and say a few words about the Leading Edge events. So please welcome Julian to the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, Julian Malnick. The man himself.
Steve, I've never been welcomed before, Steve. That's very nice. Thank you, everybody. Feel very well. Just quickly, I just wanted to. It is nice to see what a vibrant event, eh? Just look around the room. We managed to keep this thing sparking year in, year out. And one of the things that you've had an email about recently is the Leading Edge series. Various reasons, including a lot of commercial competition of PR firms and everybody getting in on the act with the small companies particularly, and the fact that on Friday, Thursday night is the new Friday night, thank you COVID. So a lot of people aren't staying in town for the Thursday night. It's okay to move it. It's been our first Thursday's always been ours, but it doesn't really matter with the Leading Edge. This one is going to stay first Thursday, and it's bi-monthly, as you know. But the fill-in, the Leading Edge, we're going to recreate. So we're going to be speaking with our sponsors. I was speaking with Bryson Peers just now from Veritas and all the other sponsors particularly, but also members generally. So anybody who has fresh ideas about where to put the Leading Edge, how to do it, do we need a showcase with 5 companies at a time at lunchtime? Completely open. Let's make it fresh and exciting and give it a good rebirth in the new year. So that's what to expect for your Leading Edge. And I'll hand you back to our very much smoother than I am MC, Steve. Thank you.
Thank you, Julian. That's the nicest thing anybody has said about me in the last 5 minutes. Okay, we want to thank our sponsors. A big thank you to our sponsors who make this club possible. Without our sponsors, we would have no club, of course. So thank you to our sponsors, our gold sponsors, Bear Australia and the AME Group, our silver sponsors, Broken Hill Mines, Invertia, the New South Wales Minerals Council, Taurus Funds Management, Fender Geophysics, TEAS, Veritas Securities, CRE Insurance, Ioneer, Kingsgate, RFC Ambrian, IMARC, AMEC, APM Graphics, Research as a Service, otherwise known as RAS, and the Stock Network. You can see their banners out the front here. They support this club. Will you please support them with your business? And can you give our sponsors a big round of applause too? Thank you. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we've seen some big global moves in relation to critical minerals recently, most notably the landmark agreement signed between President Trump and Prime Minister Albanese in Washington, DC, as well as cementing the long-standing partnership between our two countries. It was a strong recognition of the growing strategic importance of our national mineral resources. The challenge now is to turn promises made in the White House into real projects here in New South Wales and across the country. As we know, critical minerals have a variety of uses, including in consumer tech, advanced manufacturing, healthcare, and for renewable energy. However, it is highly unlikely that President Trump signed that agreement in the White House with our Prime Minister because he wants more batteries, wind turbines, and solar panels. It's no coincidence that all 31 minerals classified as critical by our federal government also have a wide variety of significant military applications in addition to their other uses. For example, antimony is crucial for the production of military-grade ammunition, flame-retardant equipment, and for defence electronics. Extremely heat-resistant cobalt is used for high-temperature applications, including in the engine of the F-35 fighter jet, in batteries for UAVs, for stealth coatings, and in other military propulsion systems. Molybdenum is used to make armour plating for military vehicles, aerospace alloys, missile components, and high-tech electronics like guidance systems and for the heat shields of hypersonic weapons. Nickel is essential for aviation engines, corrosion-resistant ship structures, ballistic and blast protection, and electronic equipment with radio frequency interference resistance. And then, of course, there's scandium, essential for high-performance alloys and advanced semiconductor technologies with applications for military aircraft and naval components in armoured vehicles, precision coating for optics and instruments, and developing aerospace technologies too. So while government support for critical minerals is often portrayed in the context of their role for renewable energy, clearly another key motivation is their use in these and in many other military applications. And consider the further fact that China controls 60% of global supplies of critical minerals and over 80% of global processing, and it's clear these minerals are at least as essential to the national security needs of Australia and our allies as they are for the energy transition. Regardless, the rapidly increasing need for these critical minerals across such a wide variety of essential applications presents significant opportunities for our country and for our state. And right now in New South Wales, for example, there are at least 7 critical minerals projects in the pipeline, including for various rare earths and mineral sands and for nickel, cobalt, scandium and antimony. As well as contributing to our national security and energy needs, these projects could deliver over $4 billion in potential new investment and over 3,000 potential new jobs for New South Wales. 3 of these 7 projects are fully approved, fully permitted, including the one we will hear about today. Others still need to run the gauntlet of an approvals process that is increasingly fraught with complication and duplication at the state and federal level. Whether we can seize these opportunities will depend upon whether the political rhetoric on critical minerals is matched by the political will to deliver another key element of that recently signed White House agreement. Because in addition to the promises made on mining investment, both countries also promised to fast-track approvals processes for critical minerals to get more mines into production more quickly. And you may recall the footage of President Trump saying in 12 months' time, we're going to have more of these things than we know what to do with, or some words to that effect. And he's obviously not familiar with the planning system here in Australia. So achieving this is going to be a big challenge, and it'll be a test of resolve for our political leaders, because history suggests Government promises for faster planning approvals, for streamlined assessment processes, for less bureaucracy are easy to make, but are much harder to deliver. And how often have we seen rhetoric from governments about cutting red and green tape lost in a sea of proposed new legislative and regulatory requirements from multiple government departments and agencies? Regulatory creep on steroids. How many times have we heard governments promise to remove state and federal duplication, yet continue to introduce new measures that do the exact opposite? And when you factor in opposition from the Greens, for example, and others who say they support the energy transition, they just oppose the mines that produce the minerals needed for it, it will be a difficult promise to keep given the political landscape here in Australia. And it should also not be forgotten that after signing that agreement in the White House, that historic agreement, the Prime Minister got on his plane and flew back to Australia and went straight to the federal parliament and cut a deal with the Greens on the EPBC legislation, reforms that are likely to make approvals for resources projects in this country harder to achieve. Not that they were already easy to achieve, but even harder to achieve based on those reforms, including for critical minerals projects too. It's another example of why I'm sceptical of the willingness of governments to get things done and to meet these promises, because in my experience, many politicians talk a big game on critical minerals. It's a safe space for them to talk about mining and resources because they can tag it along with renewable energy. I've only just started recently talking about it in terms of national security as well. And that's welcome that they're finally saying that. But it's been seen as a safe space with lots of glossy leaflets and strategies and not a lot of delivery. That is changing here in New South Wales as well. But there's still a lot to do to match the rhetoric with reality. On the bright side, as I mentioned, 3 of those projects are fully permitted and already approved and ready to go. And on that note, it's enough from me for now. It's time to hear from today's special guest, Sam Riggall, the Managing Director of Sunrise Energy Metals. Sam joined Sunrise Energy Metals in 2013. He was previously Executive Vice President of Business Development and Strategic Planning at Ivanhoe Mines, where he was responsible for securing the agreement to develop the Oyu Tolgoi copper mine in Mongolia. I've probably pronounced that wrong, Sam. You'll be able to correct that for me. While also managing Ivanhoe's other global business development opportunities. Prior to that, Sam worked in the Rio Tinto Group for over a decade, covering project generation and evaluation, business development, and capital market transactions. He's a graduate in law and economics from Melbourne University and has an MBA from Melbourne Business School. Will you please join me in welcoming Sam to the stage?
Right. Julian is a cunning marketer because those of you who paid attention may have seen that Robert Friedland was advertised as the presenter today, but you have me instead. But it has certainly filled the room, so thank you for attending. And it is great to see so many people here. The Sydney mining industry, New South Wales mining industry is very much alive. I got a lot of directions and instructions about how I should present my slides today, about font size, how much technical information should go in them. So I've just prepared one slide. Whoever's running the slides, that's that one there. So those of you who are visual or kinesthetic learners, I'm sorry, but you're going to have to actually listen quite hard today. And what I would like to do is not give you really a pitch on our project. I do that enough. As Stephen said, I would like to talk a little bit more generally about critical minerals and where they fit in, I guess, the geopolitical landscape and really what the implications for the mining industry are. But first, I'd like to begin with what is scandium. And maybe this is a bit too much detail, but the detail is really important in these markets. And you'll get a sense of why that is as we go through it. Scandium is one of the rare earth elements. There's a basket of rare earth elements, 17 of them. Of those, most of them are lanthanides. There are 2 transition metals, scandium and yttrium. It is a very unique element on the periodic table due to its outer electron structure, the shell structure, which gives it quite amazing properties when you combine it with other elements. It completely transforms the properties of other elements when used as an alloy or a component in some other structure. It's quite different to other rare earth elements. So I have the luxury of being able to get up here and talk about one rare earth element and focus people's attention on that. I feel quite sorry for those CEOs running companies with rare earth projects who have to try and explain what 7 or 8 different elements do and why they are important. But let's just focus on the scandium today. The reason it's quite different from other rare earth elements, there are 3 things. One is the size of the market. I think it is actually the smallest metal market that I'm aware of on the periodic table. So there's only tens of tons of material transacted globally every year of this metal. Makes it very niche. Even by rare earth standards, that's very, very small. But on the other side, it's an extremely high value material. And probably the best way to illustrate that is if you think about like a 20-litre bucket you might take from your laundry, just a standard bucket. If you fill that with neodymium or praseodymium oxide, so let's talk about the magnetic rare earths, the ones that everyone's so focused on, you'll probably get 140 kilos of oxide into that bucket. And the market value of that will be around about $10,000. You do the same with scandium oxide, and you get about half the weight because it's elementally lighter, less dense. But the value is about $120,000, so a 12-fold increase on the neodymium and praseodymium. It is actually a very high value material in I guess, silver equivalent terms. It's about 5 times the price of silver today, which is at all-time highs. And the third reason it's quite different is the diversity of applications. And I want to touch on these. As I say, the detail is important, but it does serve a number of different markets and industries. Firstly, the largest market for scandium today is the solid oxide fuel cell market. And these are fuel cells that are created using metals, stacks of metals. If you think of like an EV battery, you've got sort of stacks of electrodes. Here we're using stacks of similar electrolytes, but they tend to be made of ceramics, which are doped with metals. And these solid oxide fuel cells are terrific sources of electricity generation. If you run a source of hydrocarbon through these fuel cells and let them react with the electrolyte, the ceramic electrolyte, you get a bit of carbon dioxide, you get a lot of heat, and you get electrical current. So they are very good solutions for off-grid power generation solutions. And from order to delivery into the field, you're looking at about 90 days. You can build them quickly. If you have a source of natural gas, you can run through them. You can generate power really well. You can imagine this is going down a treat as these AI data center hyperscalers are trying to find sources of power across the United States. And fuel cells will be a critically important solution for that. But where does the scandium play in this? Those electrolytes that undertake the catalytic conversion. Remember, this isn't combustion. We're not combusting gas to try and generate power with a turbine. It's an electrochemical reaction. Those electrolytes are doped with quite a lot of scandium and manufactured mostly throughout Southeast Asia and exported to the United States. But these fuel cells are being deployed around the world for off-grid generation solutions, data centers, Amazon fulfillment centers, remote office blocks, military sites, even some mines in the United States are running on these fuel cells. So that's the largest consumer of scandium today. There is another market which ultimately I believe will dwarf fuel cells and everything else, and that's the aluminum alloy market. Scandium is pound for pound, unit for unit, the most effective alloy that exists for aluminum. Sorry, I've spent a lot of time in the States, pardon the aluminium aluminum, but a very small dosing of scandium as an alloy with aluminum completely transforms its properties. It increases the alloy to something close to the strength of steel without adding any weight. It makes it corrosion resistant. It makes it weldable. Most standard aluminium alloys cannot be welded, and that's a holy grail for the aircraft industry and the automotive industry. And it also increases or decreases the impedance of electrical current through aluminum for high voltage power transmission. Now, the alloy applications have been known about since the 50s, and they were developed by initially the aerospace industries, but most major global aluminium companies have patents around aluminium scandium alloys, their own specific formulations. But this is an industry where if you start to get it into mainstream applications, be it commercial aerospace, commercial automotive, you are scaling volume very, very quickly. You go from tens of tons to hundreds of tons to thousands of tons in a very short order of time. And then the final application or the final industry I'd like to focus on is chips, semiconductors. And this is a relatively new application. It didn't exist when I started with Sunrise back in 2013. But those of you who have gone through our progression of wireless communications technology, which is everyone in this room, and that transition we made from 3G communications, that little 3G you used to see on your phone, now 4G to 5G and what will eventually be 6G, all of that has been made possible by Scandium and Scandium alone. And the reason is that Scandium has, when combined with other elements, and what we do is we produce a Scandium aluminium nitride thin film for these chips. That material has the strongest piezoelectric effect of any material that we've developed before. And the piezoelectric effect in a chip allows that chip to filter electromagnetic spectrum really efficiently and effectively. So when you think about, when telecommunications companies talk about spectrum auctions, as governments allocate bits of the spectrum for telecommunications companies to work their networks on, we're getting narrower and narrower spectrum allocated, operating at higher and higher frequency, which means that the filtering technologies have to increase by multiples to actually be able to filter out noise and to be able to focus on both transmission and reception of data across that spectrum. And it's been effectively Scandium that has made that possible, and it will continue to make it possible, probably through 6G as well. So all of these three industries I've mentioned, solid oxide fuel cells, aluminum alloys for lightweighting, and semiconductors, you can imagine are very high on the list of priorities for most Western governments, and particularly the United States. To Stephen's introduction, it is true that environmental aspects and the environmental markets for a lot of these critical minerals are important, but at the moment, almost the entire lens is devoted to national security and defence applications. And this is why these industries are particularly important, because it depends on leadership in AI and the ability to deploy AI quickly. It depends on your ability to make high-performance alloys, both for commercial and defence sectors, and mobile communications technologies are fundamental. For those of you who are interested, Robert Friedland and I did a webcast last week, which is on our website, which is focused almost exclusively on the defence sector applications for Scandium and telecommunications, leadership in battlefield environments, and that's what the US Defence Department is working on at the moment. So that industry at the moment is all US based. So almost 100% of the demand globally is for the United States for these end industries. Almost 100% of global supply is China, with the exception of a bit out of Japan and a little bit out of Russia. So that is the imbalance at the moment that the United States government is seeking to address. Chinese production does not rely on mining. It is all their Scandium is produced from treating waste products or from byproduct production, predominantly material that's processed in Indonesia, their nickel cobalt operations, shipped to China for refining, where they pull some of the Scandium out there. We are very bullish on the market outlook for Scandium. Some of you may say, well, for a global market of 60 tonnes a year of material, which I could probably fit on our lunch table there, what would be needed in a year today? We see this scaling very, very quickly in the next few years, and a few things give us confidence. The AI hyperscaler rollout that we're seeing now is one of the obvious manifestations of where this demand is going to come from. The deployment of solid oxide fuel cells by the end of this decade, which is not that far away, is estimated to be about 2 gigawatts per annum. Bloom Energy, the major fuel cell producer, has given that guidance publicly. That transfers to about 300 tonnes of scandium. So between now, from 60 tonnes to 300 by the end of this decade is a big jump. And at the moment, only China can service that demand. And that's a critical issue that needs to be addressed. In defence, we're seeing amazing developments in particularly 3D printing applications back to aluminium scandium alloys. If you want to print aluminium in 3D, you have to use scandium. There's no other way to do it. And what we're seeing in defence now is a just-in-time approach to component manufacturing, industrial manufacturing. We visited a big defence prime contractor a few months ago. They took us to an aircraft hangar on their site. We thought we were going to see one of the planes they manufacture. What we saw was, as we walked in the door, almost to the horizon, printers just lined up printing materials. And all this was, as they explained to us, for an individual component, they would typically have to deal with 7 suppliers along the supply chain to be able to get that component out. As long as they have the powder, they can print it themselves directly and have it into their weapons platforms or whatever platforms they're developing very, very quickly. So the world is changing, and if you leave here with a message today, probably the most important one is that the arc of technology is requiring us to get better and better at things that are smaller and smaller volume. And I'll come back to this issue at the end about the implications for the mining industry. But if Australia wants to play a really important role in these global supply chains, then we need to get good at this. The Syerston Scandium project, as I said, I won't spend long on this, but for those of you who don't know it, it's in central West New South Wales. It's near Fifield, just about 40 minutes out of Parkes. It's a large lateritic nickel cobalt resource, which happens to have scandium throughout it. We took this project as a standalone scandium development through feasibility and piloting back in 2016. So we've been at this for a long time. We've been at this for a decade. And again, to Stephen's point, permitting, it's not as though we got this permitted yesterday. It's taken a decade of work to get there. But in 2016, after completion of the feasibility study, we went out and had a look at this market. And at that stage, we could probably see 10 to 15 tonnes of demand for scandium oxide across the world. Solid oxide fuel cells were just coming. Aluminium was promising, but they didn't want to commit when they couldn't see line of sight to large-scale production. We abandoned it at that point and turned to the big nickel cobalt project. My timing was impeccable because as I started developing that, China brought a tsunami of Chinese nickel and cobalt capacity to market it in Indonesia. So that project is still there. It's being warehoused. It's gone through permitting. So it's a good option for us down the track, but it is a much bigger project than this one. We were fortunate because there is a very high-grade zone of scandium that forms a halo around this nickel cobalt laterite. If we had to mine the scandium in the laterite, just too low grade, doesn't work. But this high-grade zone is something that we haven't seen geologically before. We're seeing grades well over 1,000 parts per million here. To put that in context, when China extracts scandium from its waste products, it does it generally from waste that grades about 10 parts per million. So you're looking at a huge uplift in concentration. And those of you who know grade is king will understand the importance of that, and particularly in hydrometallurgy, because grade drives volumetric flows through your hydromet plant. The more concentrated you can make your metals in your flows, the smaller your tanks, the smaller your piping, big capital savings. So the focus for us has been taking this very high-grade anomaly and putting some engineering around it to deliver very concentrated scandium solution flows that we can then convert into high-purity oxide for the market. This is large and high-grade. And back to my point about the value of this material, those of you who think in gold terms, like at a pretty modest scandium price, this is equivalent to an in-ground value of 15 million ounces, about 10 grams a tonne. If you use scandium prices that the US government just paid, which is about $6.5 million a tonne almost for oxide to build a strategic stockpile, it's about 50 million ounces of gold equivalent at about 30 grams a tonne. So these things are valuable. What constrains them at the moment, obviously, is the size of the market that they can service. And the value that we're entrusted to unlock is building that market for this resource. This will be the first scandium mine that is ever built, primary scandium mine built anywhere in the world. As I said, there's a bit of byproduct production elsewhere, but this is built solely for producing scandium. And that's a really compelling proposition as we approach customers, and we find that with aluminium producers in particular, because what they have been lacking for 30 years is visibility on a few things. One, pricing. They are price sensitive in a lot of applications. Can you deliver at a cost that makes sense to us? So we're saying tick, yes. If we scale this to the right size, we can get unit cost down to something that is really compelling. Two, is there an alternative to China? Tick, yes, we can find you something in the Western world that will supply what you need. The third issue, which was often overlooked, but it's been interesting engaging with the aluminium industry around this, is the question of scalability. Because even with Chinese supply, the thing that they have always been concerned about is that byproduct production can only scale so fast because production is dictated by your primary product usually. So building a primary scandium mine, what we're planning to design is effectively a modular system. We'll start what we think to be relatively modestly, prove the process, get into the market, demonstrate we can produce high quality, reliable material, and then aggressively scale from there. We eventually have an expectation or a target of getting unit cost, cash cost here down to something close to $200 to $300 a kilo oxide, which then Scandium buys its way almost into any application globally if we can achieve that. On the project financing side, we've been out, like most critical minerals companies, raising equity and doing good things. It's not an expensive project. It's about $120 million US to build. And with sort of the current market support we have, we don't see any issues funding this. We're in this very lucky and enviable position that even before the feasibility study is finished, we could probably finance this today and get it into construction. So what we've got our team focused on now is what I call pre-construction work, get the FEED done, the detailed engineering underway, connect the site to utilities and infrastructure, get some infill drilling done to prepare for the mining, things that we just need. We want to take off the critical path when we step up to start construction next year. So all that's great. We've had at the US-Australia signing ceremony a few weeks ago, we were one of those 7 companies sort of listed for US Exim Bank support. They're committing $67 million US in project debt, which is terrific, and that always is an option for us. So look, in a nutshell, there's a lot of information about our project on the website. If you're interested, go and have a look. But I wanted to talk about a few other things more generally related to the industry today. And I didn't know how to put it. Diplomatic metal without metal. This is the geopolitics question. And I spend a lot of time in the US, and the last 6 months has been extraordinary as I've watched this dance between China and the United States play out, and the attitude of the US administration to how they think they need to deal with this question. To be clear, China placed export restrictions on a handful of metals. It was 7 metals back in April 2025. They've come to be known as the Magnificent Seven. And the reason they were given that nomenclature was each of those metals now has been classified as a dual-use item. In other words, they're classified for China's Department of Commerce purposes as both civilian and military in their end-use markets, which delivers a higher threshold for approvals for exports from China. And here, with these 7 metals, Scandium included, generally the approval process does not run through Ministry of Commerce or customs regulatory authorities in China. You need approval from China's Central Military Commission to export any of these materials now. And not only these materials, but any equipment or materials that relate to their manufacture or processing. So that's a very hard hurdle to clear. The export application process is difficult and tortuous, and it's also very information dense, is the best way to put it. There's a requirement to provide a lot of information to Chinese customs about any application for exporting these 7 rare earths or metals. This includes who will be the end user of these materials, what application will they be used in. Please provide the technical specifications for all the components and products they will be in. And every company that will touch this material along the supply chain, whether a warehouse, a customs agent, or any other broker. And to make matters worse, we expect each of these agents along the supply chain and the end user to provide us Chinese customs authorities with a contractual commitment that you will use the material as you have deemed in your application process. The application and the regulations are extraterritorial in effect. So it's not that you are limited to exposure in China. You can be prosecuted anywhere in the world for this. As you can see, they were designed specifically to make it extremely hard for export. A bit of feedback that we received was that Chinese customs authorities implemented this system believing no one would apply for rare earths or critical minerals. They've been delighted with how much information they're receiving under the application processes, particularly from European industry. And the information, I guess, asymmetry that's occurring here means that probably within 12 months, the Western supply chains for all these critical minerals will be more transparent to China than they will be to most Western governments. That's the reality of what we're facing. So within Washington, there's a recognition that these are problems and issues that need to be dealt with, and they are dealing with them. It's slow. They're coming from a very low base of mining experience, and there's a lot of hand-holding that's having to go on. But what I can say about this administration is that the level or the quality of people, at least in my personal experience, we are dealing with is extremely high. Most of the people who are charged with trying to fix this problem are markets people. Most of them have had careers on Wall Street. They have an instinct understanding that the best way to fix this problem is to do enough in government to ensure public capital markets start leaning in hard. And what you're seeing with share price performance on markets like ours and other critical minerals companies is the start of that effort to try and get public capital markets leaning in hard, whether it's equity or debt. And this is not going to be a short-term phenomenon. They are going to be at this for a number of years. So those of you who are interested in this as an investment space should understand, what's the best analogy? This isn't like an English first innings. This actually will go on for quite a long time. Now, I've thought hard about how can you explain just the lunacy of what's taken place with trade negotiations around these export restrictions. And the only, I guess, picture I can paint for you is that on one side of this trade negotiation has been China, who's come to the table with a bucket full of rocks. On the other side, you have the Trump administration, who's come to the table with the most sophisticated piece of technology that humanity has ever created, a GPU processor that can do absolutely incredible things. And at the moment, the bucket of rocks is worth more than that GPU processor to the United States government. And we saw that in the deal that was done. We're seeing that in the need to make chips available to China and what sort of restrictions will be placed around that. But make no mistake that primacy in raw material control and supply almost dictates everything in terms of the way policy is going to be directed in the next few years. In a country like this where we've done so well out of mining, particularly off bulk commodities, because we're really good at combining rocks and infrastructure. We know how to do things efficiently. We know how to dig a lot. We can do things really well at scale. We need to start having also a mindset about how we go from the macro to the micro now. And that discussion at the start about all the scientific uses of materials, it is a lot of detail, but we have to start understanding this detail. We need to understand where technology is heading. we need to understand where our position is in the world in our ability to provide these solutions to other governments. And this window won't be open for long. You know, state governments and federal government need to think really hard about how we position ourselves in this market, because if we don't, there are other countries out there who will do it for us, and they'll do it much faster. Or the decision will be, we can't live without China, and we'll just have to go back to what was the status quo and run the risk. But don't underestimate the amount of effort and capital that's going to be required to do this. What is the value of these materials? You know, the whole thing about the neodymium, praseodymium in a bucket at the start, it's extraordinary to me that you can put the whole rare earths industry into probably a few $1 billion of value, pricing value. It's a couple 100,000 tonnes of volume of material. But is that its true value? There's an old adage that you actually don't know the value of something until you've lost it. And I think we should thank China for waking up the world to what happens when you do lose something. And the risk of losing access to these materials is existential for a lot of industries. You just can't do anything without them. So there is no substitute for them, and you need them. So we need to think about how these markets these commodities are valued in markets. And the challenge always in markets, global markets, where China is competing in mining, is you just always have to remember that mining is not a profit creating exercise for China and Chinese companies generally. Everything services manufacturing. So the aim in a good outcome, policy outcome, is to run mining at as low a cost as possible, delivering the minimum price possible into manufacturing to ensure that we have a very strong manufacturing industry that supports exports. Back to my nickel cobalt project, when we first started that project, China was 12% of global nickel supply. They're up to about 75% today. And that's in the space of about 8 years and about $60 billion US of investment in Indonesia to get there. So the checkbooks are open, but mining is not deemed to be necessary to deliver profit in the Chinese model. And that gives us, arises then the dilemma we have as to how you bring new capacity on if pricing is always below mostly cost of production. So again, within the US, there's a lot of work going on this. Some of it is going to be trade policy and how tariffs are implemented. Some is going to be import quotas. Some might just be China deciding not to supply at all voluntarily, in which case there's going to have to be Western supply brought to market quickly. But the pricing dilemma is one that needs to be addressed because, as I say, the value of something isn't always its price, and you don't really know the value until you can't access it. And that's a situation you don't want to get to. I'm going for time. Yep. So just quickly finishing up, I want to talk about a few implications for mining about what I've talked about. When I started in this industry, I could walk around looking for money, and every second or third analyst or fund manager either had a mining engineering background, or if I was lucky, I got a geologist and they'd moved into money management, and they understood mining. I don't see them anymore. They're not there. So the people you are dealing with, the people who have that critical role of allocating capital efficiently in our economy, most of them either don't know or don't care about mining very much. So I guess the lesson I have learned as we've gone through this exercise is that as an industry, we need to put what we do in context. And if that means explaining more of the downstream and getting people to understand, well, if you're a generalist fund manager, you're not that interested in front-end loaders, you're not that interested in resource, you're not that interested in grade, tonnage, flow sheet. What you're interested in is, I'm interested in AI, or I'm interested in renewable power, or I'm interested in weapon systems. That's what they want to focus on, and that's the language as an industry we need to start communicating in, and why these things that we're being entrusted to actually develop are necessary for that. So just get across the detail and dig deep down your supply chains. If you're in critical minerals, you need to understand them. The second thing is and I don't want to put a downer at the end of the thing, but there are some lessons in history here that we're seeing sort of play out again. You're starting to see quite a lot of stockpiling taking place of critical minerals globally, not just in the US, but in China as well. We're seeing it in bulk commodities, the approach in the iron ore industry today, I guess the Chinese Steel Association's attitude to BHP and how it negotiates. It's getting difficult, and history has taught us that these are usually the canaries in the coal mine for geopolitical conflict. And in every geopolitical conflict, go back to World War I, World War II, the first thing that happens is a scramble for resource control. And in those days, it was simple. You had these massive empires that could call upon their dominions to do what they needed. It doesn't exist anymore. You can't round up lots of raw materials easily anymore. You need to actually work with your allies. You need to create structures to do this. So, just as I say, I don't want this to be a downer, but this is going to be something that continues to play out over the next few years, and you'll start to see strategic stockpiling of a lot of these materials around the world. The last thing, I guess, point I'd like to make before finishing up is the shortening of supply chains. So when I started in this industry, if I was a miner, I'd go to a refiner or I'd go to a toll processor. I'd get someone to actually convert the metal for me. And I have no interest in what happens after that. I'm living in a world now where I have to go to a defense prime in the US who doesn't have any idea of mining, but the metal goes directly into their product, and they want to negotiate directly for supply. And then that we've got to work out how that supply is managed all the way along their supply chain. The miners are being looked to by the end users to solve this problem, and it is not an easy problem to solve. So I call this the shortening of supply chains. It used to look like that. It's basically now hooked up into a circle, and the end user and the miner have to work together. I'm absolutely delighted about what we're seeing in Silicon Valley. After 30 years in this industry, of how painful the capital intensity of it is and how you have to constantly raise money, I get this immense joy watching at all these hyperscalers having to raise billions and trillions of dollars to build AI farms and data servers in Silicon Valley and across the United States. And in the old days, Microsoft, Amazon, they threw half a dozen teenagers in a garage and had a $1 billion company come out the other end. Here now they're going to face the pain that we as an industry have had to face for a long time, and that has implications that we haven't understood yet. Because if you think about the value of Western capital markets, mostly equity markets, they have been driven by the last 30 years by those industries, those high-tech industries, which are capital light. That's no longer the case, and it'll be really interesting to see how their attitude to raw material supply and energy plays out soon. One final anecdote. When I took the nickel cobalt project around China a few years ago for battery materials, I was lucky. A lot of the car makers wanted to talk about battery material supply and nickel and cobalt. It was a real eye-opener as to the way China operated here. It was really sophisticated. You would walk into a boardroom at a Chinese automotive company, and their entire supply chain would be sitting around the table. It wasn't just, and it was senior people. It was the CEO, it was directors, and the discussion was all about how they share risk across a raw material supply chain, where the value goes. To my point, the miner usually got very little at the end, but everything was focused on how you guarantee supply through to the end user. We did this for a few car companies. By the time I got to the third one, it was really noticeable. There were two gentlemen who sat at the end of the table. They were much younger than everyone else. They were in their 20s or 30s. They were representatives. One was a representative of the Finance Commission, and their role was basically to coordinate how money gets directed to all these projects. And the other one was a representative of an engineering company. And this is one thing our industry needs to think really hard about, how we deliver engineering services to make this work. Nickel and cobalt's a great example. All of those hydromet nickel cobalt projects that have been built in Indonesia, there's probably 5 of them already, about $50 billion of investment over a decade, all been done by one engineering firm. all been constructed by one construction company. And you might think that's very Chinese, but it's exceptionally efficient, and that those individual companies are world experts in what they do. So it's a very different ecosystem, and there is a reason they dominate this area. Part of it's financing, but part of it is also a capability. And as I say to the Americans, we should stop, criticising China for the way they operate and actually look at the model they've built and think about how we can do something similar, because it is possible to do something similar, possibly even better. And in this country, we have a really good resource base to do it from. So I might finish there, but thank you very much for your time, and enjoy the rest of the lunch.
Well, thank you very much, Sam. And that was, for those of you that didn't notice, Sam basically ad-libbed that speech. He didn't have notes like I've used, so he's got one page there. So as someone who worked for politicians back before the days of PowerPoint and appreciate the ability to deliver a quality presentation without notes, I think that was terrific, Sam, and the content was inspiring as well. And I think Sunrise Energy Metals might have joined the Minerals Council around 2014. So it's been quite a journey, obviously, over the last decade. But to hear how close you are now to getting almost into production at some point, it's very heartening, particularly for the future of the critical minerals industry in New South Wales. Sam has agreed to stay on stage and accept my praise, as well as take some questions from the audience. A question that I would like to ask Sam, just to kick things off, is you alluded to stockpiles in your commentary. We obviously have an announcement from the Commonwealth Government about a stockpile, a critical mineral stockpile here in Australia. What are your thoughts on that? Yeah, please.
It was a bit confusing to me, actually, because of all the materials the Australian government wants to stockpile, I don't see any end users in Australia for them. So that's the first problem. But as a tool for deepening global supply chains, you can see the logic of the strategy and having multiple sources of supply from different regions. But this is a policy that needs to be coordinated with other government partners. And it's part of that Australia-US framework. As I said, the initial attempts in the US to build strategic stockpiles for these materials is challenged simply because there isn't much Western supply, hence the $6 million a tonne offer put out for Scandium by the Defence Logistics Agency. But I think we'll start to see it emerging more as an issue. For most companies, it won't move the needle in terms of volume for what is needed. These will be stockpiles, probably scaled to the size to provide months or a few years of supply, but they're a supplement to what will be important, I guess, commercial demand that really will be the focus of these markets in the end.
So a stockpile invented by Chris Bowen. He's been involved somewhere. Maybe. Okay, we have questions from the floor. We're going to start with our spiritual father and chair, Julian Malnick.
Is that working? Great. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, nice, Sam. Completely agree on that point about if you don't make anything. We have a US shareholder called Energy Fuels, and they always say to us, well, why does Australia need NdPr when you don't make anything with it? So you speaking directly with a consumer at the other end, yep. Perfect sense. Question was just some years ago, you might remember a group touring out and dropping in on Syerston. We also went and visited 3 or 4 other Scandium projects, Steve. They're live across central New South Wales still, are they? And you might both like to comment on that. And are they, obviously, Freeland, I know Robert always has the best project. It's always that. Well, and very well invested over a long time. But how do they compete geologically, and where do they sit in the scheme of things, please?
Yeah, we call this area of New South Wales Scandium Valley when we go to America, and they get a kick out of that. It is geologically prospective for Scandium. So you've got companies like, and I'll be generous, I'll give shout outs to my competitors. So you've got Rimfire drilling there at the moment. You've got Australian Mines also running a drilling program. They're both around our property, drilling on our boundary at the moment. And you've got Rio Tinto, which owns the Owendale project to the north of us. So there's lots of scandium development potential in the region. As I said, we had the benefit of a decade of permitting. We're probably the most advanced. It's the largest and highest grade resource, at least of what's been sort of discovered there at the moment. And probably the logical first cab off the rank. But understand the psychology of customers. No customer wants a single source of supply. We need to bring alternatives to market eventually as well. But the key for me, back to the point around aluminium alloys, is the real opportunity for New South Wales and Australia is to scale this quickly with volume and get costs down, because we can turn this into thousands of tonnes of demand ultimately, which is billions of dollars of export revenue just for this one niche metal.
There was also a platinum deposit underlying, was there not?
Yeah, we have platinum at Syerston as well. We've drilled quite a few deep holes to see if we can find the source of that platinum without much luck. But there's about 1 million ounces of platinum also in the Syerston resource.
Also, Julian, I'll just add in relation to that, of the 3 projects that have their approvals at the moment, there's ASM and there's Sunrise, and I think the other one, Andrew, is the Ningen Scandium project. Is that right? Yeah. Is that one of those that you mentioned, or is it different? Further north? Yeah. So that's another fully permitted scandium project in New South Wales as well. So
Scandium Valley.
The Scandium State.
Okay.
Who have we got next?
He's good. Just my usual 3.
Oh, we're here. All right.
First up, do you still produce kitty litter? Alistair Cowden, when he had this thing about 25 years ago, his main product out of the Syerston Scandium project was kitty litter. Secondly, as it's only $120 million, why has it taken so long to produce anything? And lastly, what throughput rate are you going to be using to get your 60 tonnes per year?
So no kitty litter. It hasn't been a delay in financing. It's really been a decision by the company to wait until global demand is at a level that justifies primary mining. And as I said, we did it in 2016 and just decided it was too small. There's too much capital needed to service a 10-tonne market. We're confident now, having a look at the growth profile, that there is going to be a big market here and it justifies the development. So since 2016, we've seen capital escalation across the industry. It's gone from a $75 million US project to 120 million US, but that's okay. That's across the industry. So it hasn't been a delay. It's just been us deciding that, okay, the time now is right to build something that the market needs. The last question, sorry, the 60, yeah. The 60 is what we will start with. I think given what we're seeing from customers, it will have to scale pretty quickly from there. But 60 feels about right because that's probably global consumption today. But underlying that rate of production to me is the assumption that we are making that not all of China's current supply will be in the market by the end of this decade. That there'll have to be quite a lot that will be withdrawn. China is going to focus on scandium development within China for its own industries. So there's going to have to be someone who steps up and actually starts filling that gap as well of the void that's left from current suppliers.
Yes.
So we think that's...
So it's really throughput rate. What's your treatment?
So it's about 65,000 tonnes a year of ore through the plant. So it's embarrassingly small. I say it's more like, I don't know, landscape gardening than mining.
Yeah. Hi, thank you very much for a great presentation. Rob Coghill, Imbas Mining. Now, between the two of you, you've summarised the 2 key issues in this country. One is, how do we get through the government bureaucracy? Given the contacts and people you've got on your board, including one of the biggest guys in the world, how do we accelerate that from this group? In other words, can this group somehow put a team together that can accelerate and put pressure on the government in these various approval processes? That's the first question. Secondly, given your experience in the boardrooms of these companies in China who are taking commodities at the farm gate level or the mine exit level and then turning them into these products, highly developed manufactured products. How can we accelerate that process in this country against all the wonderful minerals we've got?
Okay, thanks, Sam. In relation to permitting, how can we move the dial in relation to politics? Well, we can elect better governments. I mean, that'd be a good start. But somehow, as a nation,
Too easy.
We don't. It's proven to be pretty hard lately, sadly. So that'd be the first thing I'd do. Secondly, my experience with politics and politicians is this: inside and outside of government, politicians only do hard things when there's a crisis. They don't do it when things are easy. The only reason we're seeing rhetoric changing in relation to critical minerals, from renewable energy to weapons, is because they suddenly realise that China's a problem and they've got to muscle up to China and they've got to be able to match China's capacity. Same thing will happen with energy policy. Same thing will happen with mining and resources policy. The same thing happens with economic policy. Politicians only act when they're forced to, when there's a crisis. And that's an unfortunate reality for the population, but sadly that's where we are in relation to the politics of this country. What you could do in relation to particular projects is invest in them, particularly those that are investor ready, and force governments to make decisions about those approvals. And more generally, if you want to join a movement, you could sign up to join the New South Wales Minerals Council, because it's a mission in life for us to make the permitting system easier. So that's my, I guess, a little bit trite answer at the end. But the reality in relation to these things politically is quite depressing from my perspective. I mean, where are the politicians of vision anymore? Where are the politicians that are determined to do something because they believe that it's the right thing to do, to take a political risk, to chew up some political capital? Sadly, these days, governments and parliaments are too full of politicians that are more concerned about holding their seat than doing the right thing.
As to advanced manufacturing, it's interesting. I spend a lot of time in the US, as I said, and I actually drive through the US. I usually hire a car on the West Coast and drive all the way to the East Coast, and I get a chance to stop with customers. What I see across the US is extraordinary. You go to the smallest towns and you find the most amazing little companies doing world-cutting work. There might be little foundries, or there might be metallization experts, but it's like a town of 5,000 people has something that is actually world class, and you meet the people who are working there. They're not a big business. I just don't see that across Australia. There are pockets of that, and I feel like the last few decades we've lost the capability around the science and manufacturing piece. We have to go back to universities, we have to go back to educational institutions, we have to go back to trades and start remembering what's important. Just a basic capability even to start with, using our hands, being inventive, being creative and taking some risks. I'm always embarrassed when people introduce me as a mining industry executive with a law degree and an economics degree and an MBA. It's like kiss of death for economic evolution, having lots of those people. You know, what's the saying? They're saying recently, America is a country of lawyers, China is a country of engineers. It's very true, and we shouldn't be down on China. The Chinese people are amazing. Their aptitude and capacity for reinvention, innovation is growing, and it's extraordinary. We do have something to learn from them in terms of how we manage risk and take some risk around things like manufacturing. But to me, you've got to get back to the educational institutions that build the capacity. We don't need more lawyers. We don't need more accountants. We need engineers. We need geologists. We need metallurgists. We need materials scientists. We need physicists. We need chemists. We need engineers. Yep.
So just would point also, why have we got so few mining engineers which are going to create this?
We are getting more, but it's off a low base, and it's been a priority for us to attract them into back into the schools again. And the industry is putting $1 million into the University of Wollongong to do that. So I think it's a very valid point. And so you don't need any industry lobbyists, Sam. I'm disappointed to hear that. Oh well, I guess I better go get another degree. We have time for one more question here, I think, and then we'll move into a vote.
Sam, thanks very much for your lecture. Where and how are you proposing that the Syerston high-grade scandium ore is processed, and into what products?
Yeah, so we will mine at the mining lease. We will convert it into scandium oxide on the mining lease. And for most industries, scandium oxide is the saleable final product. There's one distinguishing feature from the scandium industry from other rare earths, that the West actually can do things with scandium oxide. You don't need to send it to China to refine it into other products. We have the ability to convert it into master alloy in Europe or the United States or even Australia. We can produce specialty alloys out of that master alloy. We can do what we need with fuel cells. We can produce the ceramic electrolytes. Once you get to oxide with scandium, you are then pretty much independent. You can do whatever you want in Western markets to produce the final product. The one exception being semiconductors. The semiconductor industry does need pure scandium metal. So what we are looking at is building a metallization facility in the US to help service that industry. So we'd ship our oxide to the United States and process it there for metallization. That's relatively small volume. That'd only be a couple tonnes of metal a year.
Well, thank you so much, Sam, for your presentation and for your willingness to answer questions with such candour. We have a gift to present to you, as is the tradition of the Sydney Mining Club. It's a tradition that was started by our chair, Julian Malnick, and it's a tradition that we're proud to continue. And the gift is a Southern Cross flag, originally of the Ballarat Reform League. This flag was first flown on the 29th of November 1854 at Bakery Hill near Ballarat, and over 10,000 miners on that day had gathered together as a protest against government regulatory overreach and high government taxation. They sent a delegation to Melbourne to air their grievances, and one of their party was arrested. The rest of them returned back to Ballarat, and a hotel got burnt down at some point, which is, I guess, incidental. Yeah, bad move. There wasn't too many hotels on the goldfields at the time. But we know what happened 3 days later. The flag was flying at dawn 3 days later, that morning when that fateful battle took place, through the smoke, through the cries of the injured and the dying, the grape shot, and the charges of the police and the military. That flag was flying proudly as the miners' flag. And many of those miners went on to contribute in the Victorian Parliament, and Peter Lawler, for example, and others. But this is a very special gift from us, Sam, because this flag at its heart is a symbol of unified defiance against government overreach and government regulation. And if any industry knows about that, it is this industry. And we've all had first-hand experience with it. So we would like you to accept this gift in the spirit that it is meant, and we would hope that it may even fly symbolically for a day or two, or even longer, at your project when it gets into production. Should we unfurl this flag for a photo? We just need to make sure we don't hit the... Oh, there's a big one. Here we go. So will you please join me in giving Sam a round of applause?
No, it's perfect.
It's good.
My project director's here, so we're going to increase the capital estimate to add a flagpole, please. Thank you.
Dick Smith used to have one at Darling Harbour, which was a good size. So, well, thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us for our last event of 2025. And before you know it, we'll be back here again for 2026. I hope on behalf of the Sydney Mining Club team, our chair, Julian Malnick, and the Sydney Mining Club staff, that you have a terrific Christmas and New Year, that you get a break to recharge the batteries, because 2026 will be another big year for our sector, particularly here in New South Wales. Can I thank the Sydney Mining Club team, for Simon and the other members of the team. The Sydney Mining Club team members, when you put your hands up, where are you? We've got at least a couple of you here. And of course, we had some people down on the desk as well. Will Jeffries isn't here today, but he's always involved in helping to secure speakers for our events and MC some of them as well. Thank you to our Mining Club team for all your support in putting on these events throughout the year. And I know that the sponsors appreciate it as a sponsor. I know that we do. And also that the attendances at these events demonstrate the ongoing vibrancy of this club and this mining community here in Sydney. Our next event will be our first lunch event for 2026 on Thursday, the 5th of February. We are currently talking to a number of very exciting prospects in relation to the presenter for that event, and we'll be able to share further details through the Sydney Mining Club website and through the emails to our membership list once that is decided. So once again, thank you for joining us at this event. We hope that you found it interesting. We hope you've enjoyed the year. We hope you see value in our club. Thank you to our sponsors. Have a wonderful Christmas, a great new year, and we'll see you in 2026. Thank you.